Hello and welcome to part one of Access Management. My name is Dr. Suzanne Van Hove and I'll be your instructor. In the first half of this series, we're going to be looking at some key concepts here around the purpose, objectives, and scope for access management, value to the business, some policies that are important to access management, and the activity set. So let's jump right in here. The purpose here for access management, it is the process responsible for allowing users to make use of IT services, data, or other assets. And this is the important key aspect here while ensuring the security of those assets. Before I go to the next bullet point, I want you to stop and think for a sec and ask yourself, what two processes are being represented here beyond access management? Obviously, we have security, but can you see the other one? If we're accessing services, data, or other assets, we have to work within the availability management process, meaning that we have designed for that number or the additional user to access services or other assets. So availability and security are most tightly related with access management. This process will grant rights. It's going to authorize users, and it's also going to prevent access to services, data, or other assets by those who are not authorized. So we're going to be working within that CIA principle. If you remember from your foundation course, CIA tenet from information security management, confidentiality, integrity, and availability or accessibility of data. We're going to be executing the policies and requirements defined in information security and availability. So there's our answer on those interfacing or tightly related processes to access management. Remember, this is going to be the operational side of information security and availability management when you think about it, because we're actually going to be working within those policies and requirements. This process sometimes may be known as rights management or identity management. Either way, it is about allowing access to users, authorized users, to services, data, or other assets. The scope here for this process, it's going to ensure that the access is authorized, but it does not guarantee availability. I like that statement. Even though access management is kind of the front door, so to speak, for availability, meaning you have to go through access before you can actually utilize a service or data, something along that line. It does not guarantee the availability of the service. Additionally, the activities that are completed within this process are typically done by technical and application management functions. They'll be directed through a central point of contact such as the service desk, and typically, or sometimes, or I'm going to say more often than not, access management is typically initiated via a service request. Somebody will ring up the service desk and say, I need access, or I need to join into this one user group. I've switched roles in the organization, something along that line. Service management functions will execute the activities of access management. So what's the value to the business? Well, first of all, you now have a stopgap here and you can control access to services, which will help maintain confidentiality of data and services for that organization. Employees have to have the right level of access to execute their jobs effectively. So now we can segment or separate out what employees are allowed to view or to access if that's important to the organizational work procedures. We also provide the ability to audit the use to make sure that there is no abuse or misuse of those services. And it also gives the ability to turn off the access of that individual, so withdrawing the rights if necessary. That could be because of change in jobs, leaving the organization, withdrawing rights because of misuse, something along that line. There's lots of reasons to withdraw rights. Not all of them are negative. May also help meet regulatory, legal, or statutory requirements. So anything in that realm is always a good thing. Some of the policies, principles, and basic concepts here, these are key terms that we want to ensure that we are very familiar with and understand the definition. First of all, access, quite frankly, level and extent of a user's services functionality or data that a user is entitled to use. So how far, how deep, how wide, etc., can a user engage with a service? By the way, before I go to the next one, we mentioned very early on in this series that there was a glossary available on the official ITIL site, going down the left-hand margin, and also in the back of the syllabus, there was an extensive word list that you needed to be aware of and also know the definitions of all of those terms. These terms are on that list. If you would like further definition, I encourage you to download that glossary. So what do we mean when we talk about identity? Well, it's unique user information that will distinguish them as an individual and also verify their status in an organization. So it could be the unique user ID or some other metadata. Rights, also called privileges, those are the settings that provide a user access to a service or a group of services or data. So from an access point of view, these are read, write, execute, change, delete type of privileges or activities that they can perform with that service or with that service's data. Services or services groups. So granting user access to a whole set of services that they're entitled to use at the same time. So this is an expedient way of creating rights lists or access controlled lists, the ACL lists. You may use a service as a rights group. And then directory services, it's a specific tool used to manage access and rights. And this would be under the authority of the technical management groups typically. And so when that request comes in, the individuals in that technical management function who have the role of managing directory services would then address that request. Okay, so 5 key concepts here. Some of the policies that are involved. First of all access and management, administration, and activities are directly tied to information security management policies. Since this process is very clearly addressing the operational state of CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of data and services, access management really has to mirror the policies within security management. The use of services should be logged and tracked to ensure appropriate use. Again, a good tool set will help with that, as well as the monitoring across the organization and ensuring that we don't have the wrong people accessing data that they've not been authorized for. Access to services should remain in line with personnel changes. So as an individual moves between departments, changes jobs, changes roles, of course we're going to need to update their access to services and to data. New jobs, new roles may not require previous access, and just for information security's sake, that access should be removed, withdrawn, and new access to the new sets of data and services, of course, granted. Accurate histories of misuse and abuse should also be maintained. We want to make sure that our controls from a security perspective are working, but we also want to track the actions of employees. If we have an individual who is consistently abusing rights, this could become an HR issue. We need to have the data to back it up. We also need to manage the escalation and communication of security events, some of the nefarious actions of an individual or individuals trying to gain access to data and information, hackers, maybe even internal employees who may be disgruntled, but we need to have the policies in place that we communicate the misuse and also escalate events as needed. All right, so here are the activities that are involved. You're not going to find this diagram in the service operation book. It was built specifically around the descriptions of the various activities, and it kind of brings together this process flow where there's going to be a request. We need to verify. We're going to ask ourselves, is it a valid user? Is it a valid request? Are we going to grant access? If no, are we removing access? If yes, we'll remove the rights. But if we are granting access, of course, we'll provide the rights, monitor the identity status, and log and track the access and raise incidents when necessary so that we can fulfill our policies, and of course then our process flow would be at its end. So let's look specifically at small groupings of these activities. So first of all, the request for access, this process triggers could be HR, could be a request for change, could be a service request. It could be an execution of a script as folks are performing maintenance or something along that line. This would be a pre-authorization within that script execution so that the individual can access the necessary data or services as they perform their job. So it might be a temporary access as maintenance is performed. Additionally, we need to know exactly what verification means. We're going to use user verification. So is the user valid? So we need to confirm their ID, again, cross-referencing within the CMDB HR systems. User validation. So is it a legitimate reason for their job roles for that request? So again, cross-referencing with HR or with departmental job roles. Okay, so once the user has been verified and validated, we will provide the rights. We do need a little bit of oversight here so we don't create any conflicts in that new assignment where we could create new groups or conflicting with other rights assignments, and then we have a lot of rules and policies and access that aren't being overseen by service operation. So in other words, we need to manage and control. Providing rights are going to be based on availability management and the information security management processes as well as service requirements. Consider this: a user asks for access to a new service. That service was designed for, say, 50 users. And right now it's already being pushed with 50, 55 users. He becomes or she becomes the next iteration, and it causes that service to operate ineffectively. So we have to be careful and making sure that when we apply rights that it stays within the boundaries of availability and security management as well as the service requirements. If rights are going to be asked for that pushes beyond the service requirements, this is going to be a time where service level management, change management, and the design teams need to get back together with the business and say, we need to know that there's been a change in business, and quite frankly, that's the job, BRM, SLM. All right, so once rights have been granted, we now need to go into a kind of a status quo holding pattern through monitoring. So we're actively monitoring how those rights are being used and ensure the rights that have been assigned remain current with the role. Think about what can happen to an individual as they progress or as time passes in an organization. The job can change. There can be a promotion or demotion, could be transfers to other departments. There could be a resignation, an unfortunate death, retirement, could be disciplinary actions. There could even be a dismissal. Each one of those actions obviously will go through HR, but they should all be triggers to the access management process to ensure that the rights that have been granted are still appropriate for the end result of all of those actions. Obviously, for a retirement, we would want to withdraw rights, or disciplinary actions, we may want to put some contingencies on rights, etc., etc. So these are all actions that need to be managed through monitoring, and they actually scream quite loudly that we use automation. Can you imagine monitoring and managing all of these different scenarios manually? So our good integrated service management tool set, as well as other proprietary commercial tool sets, will help in managing the rights assignment as well as monitoring. All right, so once rights have been granted, we're in that monitoring phase from a process perspective. In that monitoring, we're also going to be logging and tracking the access attempts or actual entries into a service data or other assets. We want to make sure that the access that has occurred is appropriate and that there is no abuse. Any exceptions that we have to the access that we're expecting, realize that they are incidents. Remember the definition from your foundation class of an incident. Any event not part of the standard operation of a service. Okay, I'm stopping right there because if it's not expected, if it's an exception to what we're expecting, it is an incident and it must be reported as such. Access records will be collected by the service operations staff, looking at and ensuring that we are all operating appropriately. This is a level of governance that will be reviewed. So removing or restricting rights, so if we go on the other side of the process flow here, if somebody is not verified, validated, they don't require the rights, we need to remove them, well, we would be revoking. It could be because of death, resignation, dismissal, we're changing roles, transfers. We could restrict rights because either a changed role or you've been demoted. A user is under investigation because of multiple attempts of trying to gain access where they're not supposed to be. They could be on leave or on temporary assignment. Realizing that these examples, they could be rather extreme, but they're also happening day to day in organizations. So reasons to remove or restrict rights. Once that we've done that, of course, we're going back up and logging and tracking and making sure that the individual truly cannot gain access after those rights have been revoked or restricted. So there's the process flow one more time. Again, this process flow is not in the ITIL volume. It is something that I created, matching up the descriptions with the activities thereof, and hopefully it makes a little bit of sense for you. And we will see you in the next lesson. Thank you so much.